All right, y'all, what's going on? It's Combo Breaker 99. I'm back with another video. All right, y'all, so I just wanted to come back and do this video here, a little bit of a more in-depth video on a segment I did on my last podcast episode. Yeah, it's just some questions that always come up in my mind. I like to talk about it because, I like to kind of look at what makes certain fighters dominant in the game and how they get their experience early on to make it where they are. I look at the dominant champions like, even Kamaru Usman, Valentina Shevchenko. Even in boxing, when you look at certain champions that can defend their belts for, a number of times, or, sometimes I'm looking at the fighters that get elevated too fast. There's a few questions I always have to ask, right? So, about a week ago now, it was LFA 151. This past Saturday, Julia Pelostri, she became the LFA strawweight champion with the first round finish over Brenda Gotig. And, she looked good in the fight. She went in there, made a big statement, and, put on a good performance, got a head arm choke over Gotig, and she snatched up that strap, right? And, as the buildup was coming up before the fight, the LFA, they were like showing the little mini documentary before the fight, and they showed all the previous champions. They showed Demopoulos, Lupi Godinez, Pierre Rodriguez, Jacqueline Amaram. They were just talking about all these fighters from here. And as I was looking at all of these fighters, of course, after each one of these fighters won the belt, the next step for them was the UFC, right? But when I looked at all four of these fighters, of course, Amaram, she's still in question because she hasn't had a fight yet in the UFC. But when you see these fighters get signed so quick to the UFC after just winning that belt, and you look at their performances in the UFC, you kind of have to ask yourself, did they get signed too soon? All right, you got to look at it and say, as soon as they got the belt, was it wise for them to get signed right away? And that's the question I got to ask about Pelostri. Like, now that she's won the belt, is the UFC going to be the next step for her? Because that's what it's like, right? It's almost like the Contender Series. It's like another version of the Contender Series. Once you show out, make a big statement in your win, they're pretty much going to grab you from there, right? Like, once you win that belt, it's like there's no other way to go now, right? But is that really a wise thing to do? Is that really wise? Like, as soon as you win an LFA belt, like in a more so underground organization, should you jump straight into the UFC? That's why I asked that question. Should LFA champions defend their belt at least 2 or 3 times? Like, numerous times. How many ever times they want to do it before they go to the UFC? And in my opinion, I think they should. I think LFA champions, like in this case for Pelostri, I think she should defend her belt a few times before she jumps straight into the UFC, or even if they offer her a contract. Because I know these fighters, maybe they have it in their mind to defend the belt, but the UFC makes that call. Or they could already say, hey, if you win the belt, we'll give you a contract, right? So it's kind of like already almost in the cards for them to jump right in. But I think that it would be wise for these fighters to, stick around at LFA and, defend their belt like, at least 2 or 3 times before they try to sign to the UFC. Because first off, if you stick around, hold on to that belt, defend it, you'll gain more experience. It's always good to gain more experience right now. And, just sharpen your skills up. Go ahead and sharpen your skills up while you're still in LFA, because, there's going to be a lot of young, hungry fighters in LFA looking to get that UFC contract, and they're going to fight. They're going to fight their behinds off. They're going to fight hard. So they're going to give you a good test. So that's a good chance for you to sharpen your skills. Because once you jump right into the UFC, that's it. What you're bringing to the table, you're going to have to go in there and make a big statement against these other hungry fighters that are trying to get into the top 15. Like if you're Pierre Rodriguez, you fight somebody like Sam Hughes. If you're limited, I'm just using these names as an example. I know she already defeated Sam Hughes, but if Pierre Rodriguez came in there limited, she's going to, she doesn't have that time to, just kind of build herself up anymore. You're in the UFC now. So once you lose that fight, say if you lose that fight, then you lose another one, you're already going to be on that chopping block early, right? You're going to be on that chopping block early once you start racking up those losses. So I think it's wise for these fighters who win that belt, to just go in there, sharpen their skills in a couple more LFA fights and get that experience. You're also going to get different looks. You're going to get different looks on a lower level, but it's going to help you build up your style and how to become a more so well-rounded fighter. It's going to teach you how to make more adjustments. Like if you're basically a striker, or striking is your forte, then you fight like a wrestler or grappler. You can learn how to sharpen your takedown defense early on in these fights. You're not going to be fighting a higher level grappler yet like you would in the UFC, right? Because the UFC is going to be the fighters that are considered the best. So why not go ahead and defend your belt against these different looks in LFA early on, just to sharpen the skills again, right? And it also, another reason why you'd want to defend the belt is because it gives you that practice at defending the title, right? It gives you that practice on building up that dominant factor, like I'm always talking about, right? That dominant factor on learning how to keep a belt and not just earn a belt, because that's what it is. Like all these fighters here, like they get to a certain level, I believe, like, Demopoulos, Lupi, Jacqueline Amarim. Well, it's still questionable for her, even Pierre Rodriguez, because Pierre Rodriguez hasn't lost yet. But fighters like Lupi and Demopoulos, they fought to a certain level and used their skills to get a belt, but I don't think they really know how to defend a belt, because, I've heard this saying in boxing plenty of times, like it's easier to win a belt, but it's harder for fighters to defend the belt. Like once they win the belt, the hunger kind of dies, and they become like this more so comfortable person, like, oh man, I can do whatever I want. I don't have to change anymore because I'm champion. But they don't understand that these other hungry fighters that are coming up right behind them are bringing something to the table. They bring in even more to the table to steal that belt from you. So that's why, it's wise for these LFA champions to, defend the belt 2 or 3 times, just to teach them how to keep a belt, just to say, okay, all right, got to take that next step now. It's my belt now, but somebody else is out there going to try to take it from me, right? You never had it before. So when you never had something before, there's that kick of getting it. But once you lose that high, you got to earn that high of like being a protective mother, a protective lion. You want to protect your belt, protect your child, right? So I think staying in the LFA organization or Invicta, whatever, just stick around there. It's good because you get to learn how to defend that title, learn how to deal with that pressure, that discipline of, just kind of pacing yourself a little bit more and understanding that if I want to rise to the UFC and make it from the top 15 to the top 10 to top 5 to being a champion, I got to learn how to, hold this belt. Because sometimes like organizations like LFA, yeah, they have rankings to a certain degree, but sometimes if a fighter just goes on a certain win streak or they, have a certain style about them or look, they can get to the title a little bit quicker. Like their rankings are not like built off of solid resumes like the UFC are right now. You know what I mean? So you want to kind of go ahead and stick around and just fight different fighters and kind of build a ranking in your head mentally and say, okay, this is where I'm at right now. Okay, this is what I need to work on right now. All right, let me fight a couple more fights just to make sure I carry that dominant factor, right? Because even fighters like Manon were multiple champions in, the regional organizations like EFC. She won the EFC belt. She won the LFA belt. Now, did she defend them? I don't think so. But in the meantime, even when she wasn't defending the belt, she was jumping from organization to taking these different titles, right? To just kind of get that look and say, okay, I can jump from here, still protect my O, and I'm going to still take this belt, right? So you see that dominant factor. Now she's number one. She's the number one contender and still undefeated in the UFC. So that's something I think a lot of these fighters got to look at, because if we look at these champions that I mentioned again, all right, let's look at Vanessa Demopoulos. All right, Demopoulos, she's 3-1 in the UFC, right? But before she got to the UFC, she defeated Sam Hughes to win the LFA strawweight belt, lost it in her next fight, right, against Lupi Godinez. And yeah, she lost it from there. She won one more fight in LFA, then got signed to the UFC, right? And from there, yeah, she's 3-1. But you still see some kind of limited skills with it, right? Now, maybe if she had stuck around, maybe she lost that belt, she could have tried to win it back and then try to go on a little streak. But I know one of the reasons that these fighters, they want to get signed is because of money, which I'll talk about here in a minute. Lupi Godinez, she won the belt. After she won the belt, boom, she got signed too. And now look, she's 3-3. And so now you see some growth in there. You see her kind of getting some on the job training, but maybe if she stuck around in LFA a little bit longer, she could have worked on her defense a little bit more, and even on her boxing skill, learning to be a little bit more selective with her punches, right? So yeah, you see that with her, and she's taking some short notice fights real quick. I think that if she fought in LFA a little bit longer, defended the belt, she would have been more of a type of fighter to be selective about her opponents, not to just jump straight in there and get that work in and wind up losing a little bit, because it still kind of makes your stock lower, right, once you start racking up these losses. All right, Pierre Rodriguez right now, she's doing okay. She's 2-0 in the UFC. She's beat Kay Hansen and Sam Hughes, and now she's lined up to fight Jillian Robertson, which is a good test for her at 115. But yeah, she was another one. She won the belt, by a finish, I believe, a first round finish, but she's jumping straight in. And I still think that Pierre Rodriguez, to me, is a fighter that has some decent skills about her, but I haven't really seen anything stand out. But she's kind of a work in progress too. Like, she could work and be a little bit more polished up before she got into the UFC. Then you got Jacqueline Amorim. She's what I've been talking about too. Like, I didn't know she was going. Well, I knew she was probably going to accept the contract, once she won her belt or defended her belt. She was the only one that defended her belt, actually, right? Jacqueline Amorim, she's been recently signed. She's one of the only fighters that defended her belt after beating Loveth Young to become champion, right? But the thing about her is also she's one that could have, benefited for sticking around in LFA a little bit longer, because she's only had first round finishes. She's 6-0, all 6 wins by first round finishes. I mean, that looks good on the resume, and the matchmakers in the UFC gonna say, oh wow, that girl's a finisher, but that's on LFA level, right? That's on LFA level. Like, she maybe needed a few more fights where she could get different looks, fight a few more rounds, get like 3 or 4 or 5 rounds in before you jump straight in. Because I guarantee you, like Jacqueline Amorim, unless they feed her an easy striker like Maria Oliveira or something like that, or Tabitha Ricci, she's not going to get any quick finishes. Like, she's not going to finish Sam Hughes like that. She's not going to finish even a Poliana Viana that quick in the first round, right? So a fighter like her, who's only getting first round finishes, may have benefited to stick around and defend her belt more than once. At least she did defend her belt one time, right? But it would have benefited her to stick around, grow a little bit more before jumping into the UFC, because yeah, these fighters, they're not going to be quick to finish like that for Amorim, okay? So yeah, I understand where some of these fighters are coming from, but I think it would benefit them to stick around and just defend their belt sometimes. I mean, if they have that option, will LFA let them stick around and do that? Like, do they do that, or do they have to jump straight in, or are they told to vacate the belt? I don't know. Because even if you were to lose on the lower circuit, the underground circuit, I still think that would help fighters, get that humbling experience. Like whenever Vanessa Demopoulos lost the belt, maybe if she did stick around a little bit longer, which she did after that fight. She won one more fight, first round finish against, I believe it was Cynthia Arceo. After the fight, she lost the belt. She would have stuck around a little bit more. She could have developed her skills a little bit more, like her striking, which is still a big part of striking and defense. She could have worked on that a little bit more. Because even you see like Tanisha Tennant just recently lost her belt to Toledo Bernardo. I think that was not really much. It wasn't really a crushing defeat for her. It wasn't too much of a crushing defeat, like say if she got signed to the UFC right after. I know I like to see her signed to the UFC, but after seeing that fight, I was like, okay, that's more of a good look for her. Like, now she can work on her takedown defense and her wrestling, and just her commitment to being a killer, right? She can go back and watch that tape and see where she failed in those 5 rounds. Because say if this was already in the UFC, like she just won the belt, boom, went straight to the UFC, Tanisha might have got a bigger rude awakening or a really crushing defeat mentally and physically somehow, right? You got to look at those different things. So after seeing her defend her belt once against Olga Rubin, right, and then taking on Toledo Bernardo and seeing how, she had a lot of trouble on the ground, that makes you say, okay, now she got to go back and work, try to win the title back and defend it a few times again, right? Because the UFC, that's kind of the stopping point for a lot of these fighters. So why not go ahead and make sure you're fully prepared for what's to come, right? Just so you don't get that rude awakening in the UFC like some fighters have that got prematurely signed. You just see them sign for like a few years, start going on an 0-3 streak, 0-4, boom, they're gone. Like we got Mandy Bohm and Jin Yoon Kim coming up, and they're both on the chopping block, right? But I understand why some want to go ahead and jump in and get that contract because it means money, right? And I think that's what all these fighters, are pressed for right now. They're pressed for money. Whether you look at Demopoulos or Godinez. So some of them that want to be champion, it may just be on an LFA level too. I understand. Like some of them just say, okay, if I get this belt in LFA, I fight this hard in LFA, I can get into the UFC, and then that'll be the happy ending of my story, right? The story continues in the UFC, but the main thing was just to get into the UFC, maybe not get the belt, right? They're not even thinking any higher sometimes. That might be how some of these fighters think, or some of these women think, okay, well, if I get in here, I can build other brands up and other branches and different business, do my OnlyFans, something like that, right? But my thing is, if you're really looking to be champion, and that's what I'm looking at with these fighters, I would love to see some of these fighters just become like a long-reigning LFA champion, long-reigning Invicta FC. I think that's what Tanisha Tennant was gunning for, because UFC wasn't signing her, so she was just defending her belt up until she lost it, right? That was like her second title defense, but she was trying, right? So, yeah, I understand these fighters, they need that money, so there's really no time to just stick around and maybe like a lower organization, make lower checks like through LFA. They're already like, oh man, my light bill's due, my car payments due, or I need a new car, I got to pay my coaches, so let me go ahead and grab this contract, right? So that's what it is, right? But I think that if they're looking for the sweet reward down the road, I really think that these fighters in LFA, Invicta FC, wherever, if you get a belt, stick around and defend it a few times, 2 or 3, 4 times, just to get the experience, sharpen your skills, get some different looks in. And like I said, just practice that that level that you're on of defending the title, because then you'll learn that new type of hunger and that new type of level that you need to keep a belt, right? So what do y'all think, man? Like, will Julia Pelostri, will she pretty much accept the contract? You think she's going to get signed in the next few months or weeks, or you think she'll stick around and defend her belt? I think she should. I think she should stick around and defend her belt, because right now, she's on a 3-fight win streak. After that Contender Series loss, she lost to Jazzy Vicious. But since then, she's fought some good little level of fighters that I've seen before. And with her winning the belt, maybe she could defend her belt against some of these other undefeated strawweights they have in LFA. All right. So, final thoughts. That's how I feel about it. LFA champions, when you get the belt, stick around, defend it, gain some experience. These other fighters, like you see with Demopoulos, Godinez, you've seen them get the belt. Boom, they either lose it, or when they get to the UFC, you kind of see that level they're on, and they kind of just start getting just put in the middle somewhere, or they get kind of lost in the mix, and you see them kind of limited, right? They start to look a little limited. Of course, the question's still out for Amarim. Even Rodriguez, she's still undefeated at the moment with 2-0, but we'll see, guys. So, yeah, let me know in the comment section what y'all think. Should LFA champions, Invicta FC champions, regional champions, should they defend their belts numerous times? Combo Breaker 99, make sure y'all subscribe, hit the like.